11. What is meant by the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? This indeed exhibits that meaning which is sought for in the letter of the Scriptures more clearly to the sight, as it bears the manifest allegory on the face of it. What is meant then under this figure is prudence, which is the comprehension of science by which all things are known and distinguished from one another, whether they be good and beautiful, or bad and unseemly, or in short every sort of contrariety is discerned, since some things belong to the better class and some to the worse. Therefore, the wisdom which exists in this world is not in truth God himself, but the work of God, that is, which sees and thoroughly investigates everything. But the wisdom which exists in man sees in an incorrect and mixed manner with somewhat darkened eyes, for it is found to be incompetent to see and comprehend clearly, and without alloy, each particular thing separately. Moreover, there is a kind of deception mingled with human wisdom, since very often there are some shadows found which hinder the eyes from contemplating a brilliant light, since what the eye is in the body, such also is the mind and wisdom in the soul. 12. What the river is which proceeded out of Aden, by which the paradise is watered, and from which the four rivers proceed, the Pison and the Gihon and the Tigris and the Euphrates. The source of the Diglath and of the Arizania, that is to say, the Tigris and Euphrates, are said to arise in the mountains of Armenia. But there is no paradise there at this day, nor do both the source of both these rivers remain there. Perhaps, therefore, we ought to consider that the real situation of the paradise is in a place at a distance from this part of the world which we inhabit, and that it has a river running beneath the earth, which pours forth many veins of the largest size, so that they, rising up together, pour themselves forth into other veins, which receive them on account of their great size, and then those have been suppressed by the gulfs of the waves, or on which account through the impulse given to them by the violence which is implanted in them, they burst out of the face of the earth in other places, and also among others in the mountains of Armenia. Therefore, those things which have been accounted the source of the rivers are rather their flowing course, or again, they may be said to be correctly looked upon as sources, because by all means we must consider the Holy Scriptures infallible, which point out the fact of four rivers, for the river is the beginning and not the spring. But perhaps this passage also contains an allegorical meaning, for the four rivers are the signs of the four virtues, Pison being the sign of prudence, as deriving its name from parsimony, from Fido parsimony, and Gihon being the sign of sobriety, as having its employment in the regulation of meat and drink, and as restraining the appetites of the belly, and of those parts which are below the belly as being earthly. The Tigris again is a sign of fortitude, for this is which regulates the raging commotion of anger within us, and the Euphrates is a sign of justice, since there is nothing in which the thoughts of men exult more in than justice. 13. Why is it that he not only describes the situation of the Euphrates, but also says that the Pison goes round all the land of Evilat, and that the Gihon goes round all the land of Ethiopia, and that the Tigris goes towards Assyria? The Tigris is a very cruel and mischievous river, as the citizens of Babylon bear witness, and so do the Magi, who have found it to be of a character quite different from the nature of other rivers. However, they might also have another reason for looking on it with aversion. But the Euphrates is a gentler and more salubrious and more nourishing stream, on which account the wise men of the Hebrews and Assyrians speak of it as one which increases and extends itself, and on this account it is not here characterized by its connection with the other things, as the other three rivers are, but by itself. My own opinion is that these expressions are all symbolical, for prudence is a virtue of the rational part of man, and it is in this that wickedness is sometimes found. And fortitude is that portion of the human character which is liable to degenerate into anger, and sobriety again may be impaired by the desires, but anger and concupiscence are the characteristics of beasts. Therefore, the sacred historian has here described those three rivers by the places which they flow round, but he has not described the Euphrates in that manner as being the symbol of justice, for there is no certain and limited portion of it allotted to the soul, but a perfect harmony of the three parts of the soul and of the three virtues is possessed by it. 14. Why God placed man in the paradise with a twofold object, namely that he might both till and keep it, when the paradise was in reality in need of no cultivation, because it was perfect in everything, as having been planted by God, nor again did it require a keeper, for who was there to ravage it? These are the two objects which a cultivation of the land must attain to and take care of, the cultivation of the land and the safe keeping of the things which are in it, otherwise it will be spoiled by laziness or else by devastation. But although the paradise did not stand in need of these exertions, nevertheless it was proper that he who had the regulation and care of it committed to him namely the first man, should be, as it were, a sort of pattern and law to all workmen in the future of everything which ought to be done by them. Moreover, it was suitable that, though all the paradise was full of everything, it should still leave the cultivator some grounds for care, and some means of displaying his industry, for instance, by digging around it, and tending it, and softening it, and digging trenches, and irrigating it by water, and it was needful to attend to its safety, although there was no one to lay waste, because of the wild beast, also more especially in respect of the air and water, as for instance when a drought prevailed, to irrigate it with a plenteous supply of water, and in moister weather to check the superabundance of moisture by directing the course of the streams in other directions. 15. Why, when God commanded the man to eat of every tree within the paradise, he speaks in the singular number and says, Thou shalt eat. But when he commands that he shall abstain from the tree which would give him the knowledge of good and evil, he speaks in the plural number and says, Ye shall not eat of it, for in the day in which ye eat of it, ye shall surely die. In the first place, he uses this language because one good was derived from many, and that also is not unimportant in these principles, since he who has done anything which is of utility is one, and he who attains to anything useful is also one. But when I say one, I am speaking not of that which in point of number comes before duality, but of that one creative virtue by which many beings rightfully coalesce, and by their concord imitate singularity, as a flock, a herd, a troop, a chorus, an army, a nation, a tribe, a family, a state. For all these things, being many members, form one community, being united by affections as by a kiss, when things which are not combined, and which have no principle of union, by reason of their duality and multitude, fall into different divisions. For duality is the beginning of discord. But two men living as if they were one by the same philosophy practice an unalloyed and brilliant virtue, which is free from all taint of wickedness. But where good and evil are mingled together, the combinations contains the principle of death. 16. What is the meaning of the expression, ye shall surely die? The death of the good is the beginning of 17. Why God says, It is not good for man to be alone, let us make him a helpmeet for him. By these words, God imitates that there is to be a communion, not with all men, but with those who are willing to be assisted, and in their turn to assist others, even though they may scarcely have any power to do so, since love consists not more in utility than in the harmonious concord of trustworthy and steadfast manners, so that every one who joins in a communion of love may be entitled to utter the expression of Pythagoras, a friend is another eye. 18. Why, when God had already said, Let us make a help for man, he creates beasts and cattle? Perhaps some gluttons and insatiably greedy persons may say that God did this because beasts and flying things were, as it were, necessary food for man, and his meatest helper, for that the eating of meat assists the belly so as to conduce to the health and vigor of the body. But I should think that by reason of the evil implanted in them by nature, animals of all kinds, whether terrestrial or flying in the air, were in this age hostile to and contrary to man, but that in the case of the first man, as one adorned with every imaginable virtue, they were, as it were, allies and a reinforcement in war, and familiar friends, as being tame and domestic by nature. And this was the sole principle of their familiarity with man, for this it was fit that servants should dwell with their lord. 19. Why the creation of animals and flying creatures is mentioned a second time, when the account of their creation had already been given in the history of the 6 days. Perhaps those things which were created in 6 days were incorporeal angels, indicated under these symbolic expressions being the appearance of terrestrial and flying animals, but now they were produced in reality, being the copies of what had been created before, images perceptible by the outward senses of invisible models. 20. Why did God bring every animal to man that he might give them their names? He has here explained a great source of perplexity to the students of philosophy, admonishing them that names proceed from having been given and not from nature. For a natural nomenclature is with peculiar fitness assigned to each creature when a man of wisdom and preeminent knowledge appears, and in fact the office of assigning the names to animals is one which particularly belongs to the mind of the wise man alone, and indeed to the first man born out of the earth, and since it was fitting that the first of the human race, and that the sovereign of all the animals born out of the earth should have the dignity assigned to him. For inasmuch as he was the first person to see the animals, and as he was the first person who deserved to govern them all as their chief, so also it was fitting that he should be their first namer, and the inventor of their names, since it would have been inconsistent and mad to leave them without any names, or to allow them to receive names from any one born at a later period, which would have been an insult to and a derogation from the honor and glory due to the firstborn. But we may also adopt this idea that the giving of names to different animals was so easily arranged that the very moment that Adam gave the name the animal itself also heard it, being influenced by the name thus given to it as by a familiar indication closely connected with it.